Good morning, everybody. All right. Please join me in prayer as we just seek God's words today. So, Jesus, we just continue to thank you for all that you're doing in our lives, all that you've done, going to the cross, bringing us closer to our Father, holding us tight. We just continue to seek your guidance, your wisdom, your love, your mercy, your grace, your kindness, your goodness, your holiness. We just continue to pray that you draw us ever closer and that we're able to keep hearing you, keep following you. And we just pray that all the words and the message that we look at today will continue to help us be more like you, walk more like you, and continue to do what you wanted us to do. And so we just pray this in your wonderful name, Jesus. Amen. All right. Normally we have the handout. We've had some technological issues, so we weren't able to print. So I have my, if you look on the website, there's actually some stuff. You can actually look at the sermon outline on the website if you want some of the scriptural references. For the most part, I'll have them here. I'll read them out to you. So we're going to look at Romans chapter 14, verse 20 through 23. So if you have your Bible, you can join with me in reading this. But basically, it says, "Do not, for the sake of food, destroy the work of God. Everything is indeed clean, but it is wrong for anyone to make another stumble by what he eats. It is good not to eat meat or drink wine, or do anything that causes your brother to stumble. The faith that you have, keep between yourself and God. Blessed is the one who has no reason to pass judgment on himself for what he approves. But whoever has doubts is condemned if he eats, because the eating is not from faith. For whatever does not proceed from faith is sin." So in this very beginning, right, it's talking about what they eat. Don't let what they eat destroy the work of God. We were covering this last couple of weeks. Paul is kind of going back and forth, talking about these issues that were causing division between these believers. We've talked about it before in the very beginning. Romans is written to two Christian groups that are kind of struggling to be together. You had Gentile Christians, you had Jewish Christians, right? The Jewish Christians started the church. They led it, created all the rules. When the persecutions came from the Roman Empire, they were sent away everywhere. The Gentile Christians stepped up, led the church, and started doing all these things, right, to help evangelize as well. When the persecution ended, the Jewish Christians came back. They wanted all their rules. And the Gentile Christians said, "Now we're good. It's our turn." Right? And so now you see all this power struggle over and over about every little thing. Right? Because both groups want to be in charge. Both groups think their way is the only way to God. You also now have them trying to evangelize all the Romans that have all their own culture. Right? All their traditions. They have their own beliefs in different gods. And so now you're seeing three groups basically colliding together, trying to find Christ. And so that's where Paul is kind of writing, trying to help them navigate and help prevent all these divisions that were basically hindering people from either accepting Christ or continuing to walk after Christ, right? And so this is where he's constantly writing about solving these issues. And food was a very big one. You think about it, right? Jewish Christians, most of them stuck to what they called the kosher laws, where there was only certain meat you could eat. You couldn't eat pork, you couldn't eat shellfish. Right? They couldn't have no bacon. Right? It's tough for them. The Gentile Christians obviously ate everything. Right? They didn't have any apprehensions. They were always able to eat the stuff. So you had that in the background, right? The culture that was ingrained in them. And then you also have them now trying to witness to all these Romans that also had their own food traditions. And so one of that traditions was sacrificing food to idols. Right? Before we have a meal, we say grace. Right? We say, "God bless this food." They were doing it to another God. Does that make sense? So for some Christians, they were like, "I can't eat that food. You blessed it to another God." Does that make sense? That's not my God blessing me with this food. So they would not eat. Some would eat it, some would not. That's what Paul said. Some people, it doesn't bother them if they eat that food that was sacrificed to idol. For some, it was a big issue they wouldn't eat. So when they're reading this, right, you have to understand a lot of the cultural context behind it. Right? Because even if you read his other letters in Corinthians, right, talks about the people They had issues just having a meal together based upon their socioeconomic status. They would have communion, right? Same way we do communion. But they would have a meal before it. That's the first Passover. There was a Passover meal. There's a lot of things that they eat with it. They have a certain kind of bread. They eat parsley, horseradish. They eat this thing called apple. It's a cherry where it's like this sweet apples and caramel. Delicious, right? And they eat lamb. That's the Passover meal. In that Passover meal, there's a bread that they put away, and they do these 3 types of rituals. And at the 3rd time, they actually pull the bread out and eat and break it, right? This is what we see when Jesus is breaking his bread for communion. It's based upon this tradition, right? He's the one that comes the 3rd time, the 3rd day, right? The wine from that meal, it's all part of that Passover meal. So when he does the first communion, it's part of a meal, not just by itself. So the early church, that's how they used to do it. They would have a meal together and then do communion. But in that region in Corinth, when the rich people hosted the meal at their house, they had all kinds of stuff, good spread, right? All the meats, all that stuff. Right? They could afford it. They could feed everybody. When they rotated and went to a poor person's house, all they had was rice and beans, potatoes, right? Something that would fill you up and then have a little bit of meat, a little bit of lamb, right? So now that caused division. The rich people are like, man, I hate when it's the poor person's turn to host the meal, right? And they're like, I don't want to eat that basic stuff. And then when the poor people would come to the rich people's house, the poor people, they'd be eating all the meat, and the rich people would get mad, right? They don't even eat that much meat at their home. Why are they eating all my meat? Does that make sense? We can feel that. We can understand that. But that's what we see. So that's where Paul eventually told them, don't even have a meal together. Just show up for communion after you've eaten, because this is causing so much division, right? It's hurting people. It's like, don't even do it. It's better that you just have your meals on your own and then we come to communion later. That was a stepping stone for them. Does that make sense? Paul wants them to eat together. Paul wanted them to get past that. But in the beginning, it was too much of a hindrance. So he said, don't even do it. And so that's what we see. Paul was always trying to solve these divisions, right? These issues is basically about what causes divisions amongst us. And so we have to understand that context. Because I'll be honest, when I first read this and it said don't eat meat, right? I was like, oh no, right? I was like, I'm going to have to preach a message that says I can't eat meat if somebody's offended. If you know me, that's all bad, right? That is not good. So I was like, man, God, I can't eat meat. But then luckily, I read the context. I read all the background behind it. I was like, okay, Paul is solving division. His main issue is division. All right, but that's what we're saying. And so this is what we're going to get into, that first point that he makes. It is wrong for anyone to make another stumble. This is what Paul was concerned about. What you want is causing others to stumble. What you want is causing divisions that cause people not to want to be here. What you want is causing people not to come in. And so here he says, so this is what we have to ask ourselves, right? How much do we make others stumble with our preferences? It has to be this way. They have to do this. They have to come with this, right? Especially for churches, right? We have a lot of preferences, a lot of cultural traditions, how people dress, what they can say, right? All these type of things where it was kind of like, is that what God said or is that what we want? Because this is what we have to ask ourselves. Are all our traditions, are all our preferences, our opinions, or are they what God has said? Does that make sense? If there are opinions and they're causing somebody not to want to know about God, then we're not supposed to follow it. We're not supposed to put that on them to say, hey, you need to do this before you come in. You need to be this way before you come in. You need to be this way before God wants you. That's not what God has ever said. Does that make sense? And that's what we said. We have to understand. Paul's saying, what you want, you can want what you want, but if it makes another stumble, it's got to go. And that's what Paul's trying to tell them. Want what God wants, and if you're doing what God wants, most people will come around to that. One of the things, right, for church, they have so many types of traditions, and a lot of us don't even know why we have it, where it came from, and should we keep doing it. I'll give you an example of personal preference, right, tradition. I've worked with some churches where they had some really beautiful locations, right, up in the mountains, overlooking the bay, right, just lovely sights, lovely buildings. And so a lot of people are like, I want to get married here, right, like this is a perfect place to get married. I can do it for free if you're a member of the church. You know, we can have all these nice photos, right? So all these people want to get married at these churches, And so the churches were very strict, right? They're like, you can't have any wine during your wedding. You can't drink in God's house. And so some people, I see some babies like, what? Some people are like, wait, some people are like, we want wine at our wedding. Why can't we have it? And they're like, you can't drink in God's house. And so I've heard these couples kind of talk to the leaders, right, when they're trying to schedule this. And the people would ask them, if I can drink at home, what does it matter if I drink in church? God's everywhere, right? God's with me everywhere, so why is one place different than the other? And they said, nobody's ever drank in the church. You can't drink in the church. That's it. If you want your wedding. So a lot of people have their wedding, they'll have the wedding in the church, and then they'll have the reception somewhere else. Does that make sense? They're like, okay, fine, we're going to keep doing what we want. And so in this mindset, right, the church is kind of driving them away. Some people walk away completely, right? Some people that are like, they grew up in church, right? They're not very committed Christians yet. And so they're trying to come back. They want to be blessed by God, do it in his house, right? Make the vows in front of God. And so in some ways they're like, man, Christians are just as uptight as they ever were. I don't want to be here. Does that make sense? Nothing's ever changed. People are always making up stuff. And so they don't ever come back to church, right? That could have been a great opportunity for them to say, hey, you're going to be married in front of God. Let's do Christian counseling, marriage counseling, all these things, how to be a man and wife together, right? You could set up a lot of opportunities. But yeah, for the church, they're like, you can't drink. And so their stance was nobody's ever drank in the church. But is that true? No, not at all. There is no rule that says you cannot drink in church. If you look historically, the Catholic Church drinks real wine for their communion. We got grape juice here, right? Back in the day, Catholic Church, they would give out real wine. Because why? When Jesus gave communion, when he gave the first communion, when he did it part of Passover meal, there was real wine there. So they want to be as authentic as possible and do exactly what Jesus did. So they give out real wine. And they give it even to little kids, right? As a little kid, you can be in there getting drunk in church. Right? You're not supposed to get drunk off one little glass, but some kids will be like, I like this, and they just keep going back and back. Right? Like, I need more Jesus. Right? And they're like, whoa. You got to watch your kids when they give out that real communion. But that's what we said. Like, for the Catholic Church, they've done this. Recently, they kind of try to change that position a little bit. Some people are more traditional. They've kept it. Others are like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be giving kids wine, all this other stuff. Right? But for the most part, they've always done it. Our tradition, we're non-denominational, but our history, we're basically Protestants. We come from the group that broke away from the Catholic Church. Our roots, our foundation, comes from those people that were drinking in church. Does that make sense? That's where it's kind of like, part of why we have these rules is because when we broke away from the Catholic Church, we wanted to separate ourselves from what they used to do. We don't think they're doing it right, so we're going to change, we're going to be better, and these are the rules that we're going to follow. Does that make sense? So our traditions come from man's opinion. They were not what God said. You see what I'm saying? And that's what we're trying to understand. What is our preferences? What is what God has said? Because even where, Christians are like, you can't, we're talking about drinking at a wedding, right? When you're like, no Christian can do it. God would not approve of that. What was Jesus' first miracle? He turned water to wine for a wedding. So when somebody's telling somebody they can't have wine at their wedding at the church, God would not approve of it. Is that true? No. Right? Because even, some people are like, well, you can have one glass, just one to celebrate. We can't make sure you don't get drunk. And it was kind of like, when did Jesus make the wine? In the middle of the party. Jesus said, keep it going. We're running out. Right? His mama was like, make some more. Right? So Jesus initially said at first, I'm not going to do this. And then his mama was like, no, everybody, grab a bunch of buckets. He's going to do it. Does that make sense? His mom made him do it. But this is what we see, and then there's certain dialogue where the guy's like, man, you guys brought out the best wine, right? Like, and it's kind of funny, like, when you think about it, when he made the wine so delicious, where people are like, I don't want to drink it, or I'm going to drink as much of it as I can, because it's so delicious. Does that make sense? Right? That's where it was kind of like, they had no problem, Jesus had no problem making it. If you know Jewish culture, when they got married, it actually lasted for 7 days, the party. Does that make sense? So they were partying for 7 days. It was such a celebration of what God brought together. Does that make sense? And that's what we said. They had all that food, the wine, things like that. And so when we look at it's like, what does God really say? What did he do? Right? It's funny to see how Christians can just come up with all kinds of rules that even your rule would make Jesus look bad. Does that make sense? Because if you're saying you can't have wine at your wedding, you shouldn't. And if Jesus broke your rule, are you making him a sinner? Just by your own rule. Does that make sense? And that's why I said you have to be very careful to make sure you don't say something that God already did. And so that's why I said for Christians, we have to start understanding our opinions versus what God said. Paul goes even further in this in verse 22. He says, the faith you have, keep between yourself and God. Right? He's saying either person can make this choice, right? If somebody thinks it's okay and the other person's offended by it. What does it say? Keep it to yourself. Is that our opinion of Christians, that they always keep their opinions to themselves? So this is my question. Why are Christians known for being so judgmental? If we see even Paul's writing tells you to keep it to yourself. Why are we so judgmental? Why are we known for being so judgmental? And this is where we're trying to understand the context of what Paul's writing, right? Christians are having so many divisions over and over about all these things. Why keep bringing it up? Right? Why keep trying to force everybody to do what you want? That's why I said all his books, Ephesians, he covers this a lot. Why is everybody going back to the law? Right? Why is everybody trying to follow all these things that we're supposed to be free from? So he covers it in Galatians, Corinthians, he covers it in Romans. Right? Paul is trying to tell them, keep it to yourself. And so for some of us will be like, but wait a minute, aren't Christians supposed to share the gospel? Aren't we supposed to tell people? Yes. But what is the gospel? God loves you. God created you. Jesus died for you on the cross. He paid for the price for all your sins. He restores your relationship with the Father. You are secure because of Jesus. Nothing can take you away. That's the gospel. That's it. Our preferences, how they should change their behaviors and all that sort of stuff, that's not part of the gospel. Does that make sense? We're looking at it as like we have to tell them every single thing that they're doing wrong from the get-go. That's not what the gospel was. The gospel is good news, right? Pastor Paul covered that. The meaning means good news. Is it good news if somebody lists out every single way you're messed up and damaged? Would you be like, thank you for the good news? Right? I didn't realize how bad I was. No, that's not good news. Good news is Jesus died for you even though you're his enemy. Even though you weren't looking for him, he came for you. Right? That's the good news. And so that's what we're sharing. That's what we're talking about. We don't have to always tell about what they should do from the get-go. If somebody asks us, we can tell them, hey, yeah, maybe you should do this, right? Or give opinions. But if they don't ask us, why are we so eager to tell them everything that they should be doing? And so some of us might feel like, well, that's only one verse, right? Are we really looking at what Paul was saying? Is that his full context? Keeping it to yourself. So you obviously don't have the handout, but if you look at all of chapter 14 from the very beginning with me, you'll see how many times he kept repeating this. In 14:1, he says, do not quarrel over opinions. In verse 2, let not the one who eats despise the one who abstains. Verse 14, who are you to pass judgment on the servant of another? Right? He's basically saying they belong to God. It's God's job to tell them what to do. Why are you telling them? They don't belong to you. In verse 10, why do you pass judgment on your brother? In verse 12, chapter 14, verse 12, each of us will give an account of himself to God. It's not your job to, when they're in front of God, you're going to tell them all the stuff that they did or did not listen to. God's going to be like, what did you do? Let's talk. What happened between us? I don't care about them right now. What happened between me and you? Right? And so that's what we said. Paul continues to say this. It's between you and God. In 13, right? But rather decide never to put a stumbling block or hindrance in the way of a brother. This is the same. It's restating exactly what we looked at in our verses. He said it earlier. Do not put a stumbling block. In verse 19, leading up to where we started. So then let us pursue what makes for peace and for mutual upbuilding. If you're telling everybody what they're doing wrong, you're tearing them down over and over and over again, will there be peace? No. Will you build them up by tearing them down? No. Right? If you look at how Jesus worked with people, he built them up. This is what you were made to be. This is what you should, this is who you were created to be. This is how you were made. This is how God first created you. Right? He tells them, he reminds them of how great they can be. And then he's like, I can help you be free from the other stuff. Right? He builds up. His words are like, hey, let me tell you who you are. And then in the next chapter, we'll cover this next week. Pastor Paul will cover it. Right? In 15:1, it says, we who are strong have an obligation to bear with the failings of the weak and not to please ourselves. Right? We want to tell people they're wrong. We want to feel better. We want to say, hey, I'm better than them. Let me show them how they're wrong. But Paul's kind of saying, even if you know you're right and they're wrong, keep it to yourself. Let God work on them. You work on your relationship between you and God. Help them and be patient with them. As we know, God will fix them. God will correct them on that. And so as we understand this, we're kind of Paul saying, keep it to yourself, right? He then goes even further in the next verse. It says, blessed is the one who has no reason to pass judgment on himself for what he approves. The he approves is not God. It's not written in that language. It's not saying that God's the one that approves of it. It is saying, if a person does not believe he should be judged for what he approves, he's good. He's blessed. You guys see that? Right? I'll read it again. Blessed is the one who has no reason to pass judgment on himself for what he approves. See, right? So even if if somebody thinks they're wrong, don't matter. You think you're right, you're good. Some of us might be like, no, you can't preach that kind of freedom. You can't just tell people whatever they think is right, they can do. You know how many people will abuse that? You know how people have abused that in the past? Right? We'll come up with all these reasons why we can't even follow that teaching. Our opinion is that nobody can be trusted because their sinful nature, that they can approve of what they're doing. That's my opinion too. Right? I know the history of church. I know how people have used freedoms to do whatever they wanted, and they did it in violation of what God's laws are. My opinion, that's a dangerous text. But that's my opinion. But what God said, what Paul was writing for God, saying, if they don't feel it's wrong, they can do it. And I have to go with that. Does that make sense? I can try to warn people. I can try to advise them and say, hey, be careful. Right? There's a lot of other text that talks about be careful with your freedom. But I cannot rob somebody of their freedom that Christ gave them. Because that's what God said. And so as we think about this, right, we're kind of thinking like, can anybody really bless their behavior? The question I have for you is, do you really follow all the laws God taught you, or do you pick and choose what laws you want to follow? If it's right in your mind, do you do it? Do you break what he wrote in his book? Some of you guys are probably like, nah. Right? Man, maybe. Right? But hopefully you guys realize that we always justify our choices and condemn others that do the same thing. I'm going to give you an example. How many of you guys have a house here? How many of you have a mortgage or had a mortgage? Did anybody buy their house outright in cash? No? What does the Bible say about buying a house? You can't buy it on interest. You must have it all, cash. If you ever take a financial peace class, they have a lot of Christian things where they teach people how to get out of debt, how to have financial freedom. God always told them, don't go in debt. Right? That was his rule. That was his principle. Some of us, we're talking about what we can spend our money on, right? What you can do with it. Everybody's teaching is that all your money is 100% God. It belongs to him. Right? And so if you have that understanding, you have that belief, if you buy a house on a mortgage, you're not doing what God said, number one. Because say you buy $1 million house. Out here, that's still on the very cheap range, right? That's not. If you buy $1 million house on 3% interest, which is pretty good, you're going to pay an extra $300,000 to $400,000 over what that house was, what you bought it for initially, what the price you agreed to. Does that make sense? So you used God's money and wasted $300,000 of His to have your house when you wanted it. See how that can work? Right? Because that's His money. You're paying interest to somebody else. It's going to you to get it when you want it. Now, I'm sure most of you guys will say, but Joaquin, we live in California. Nobody can buy a house without buying it on a mortgage. Everything's so expensive here. We have to do it. God wants us to do it. Does He? Does He want you to live in the most expensive area? Does He want you to live in California? Do you have to live in the Bay Area? Or is it your preference? Is it your choice? Is this your comfort zone? Right? We were talking about this. Everybody wants to live in California. Right? That's why it's so expensive here. The weather, right? All the stuff that's here. The mountains, snow, beach, everything, right? All the food, all the diversity. Right? Most of our people groups are here. It's very safe for us to live in this area. So we will pay the extra money. But can we say that's what God wants? Does He want us to have a mortgage and have a 30-year commitment? Right? One of the things they talk about is like, don't use your freedom to go back into a yoke of slavery. When you buy a house on a mortgage, you are a slave to that house. You must work the next 30 years of your life to ensure you can always pay that mortgage. Does that make sense? You always have to have a job that makes enough money that you can afford that house. Right? You have to stay in that area now for 30 years for the most part. Is there a lot of options you can rent it, all that? Yes. But for the most part, you got to always come with that check every month. Does that make sense? Right? Because am I going to give up this house? Some people were talking about, like, if you sell your house now and move somewhere else, you ain't never coming back. Because you're probably never going to afford it. It's going to go, that's true, that's wisdom. But that's what we say, right? In some ways, you will not leave right now because you know you can never come back. But see, don't you see, everything's based on you. You're not trusting God in any of that process. Does that make sense? Now, some people can say, hey, God called me to live here. I got proof, I got evidence. I'll be like, go ahead then. I believe that. I know God calls people to be here. But we can't say every single person that's here can make that claim. But that's between them and God. Does that make sense? But hopefully, like, people start to realize, hey, God directly said not to take this on interest, and we did it. We used the freedom to get what we wanted. So if we use freedom to get what we want and we approve of it and say, hey, Joaquin, you can't convict me of doing this, good. But don't convict somebody else for doing it in a different way. Does that make sense? Because then you're following that scripture for your benefit, not letting them do it for their benefit. One of the other examples that we break, so that one's kind of tougher because it is depending on how you interpret it, right? Do we follow those other laws? It's very specific that you can't buy a house. I'll give an even more example of how we break God's commandment. And not only do we break it, but we actually break it right here in this house. So the way we use that example of like not drinking in God's house, right? Like people are like, you can never break God's laws in his house. That makes it even worse. We do it every week. So let me ask you guys, is everybody Sabbath today for the most part? No? Yes? No? We talked about the Sabbath on different days. That's what Pastor Paul covered the other week. That's not what we're talking about, though. But if your Sabbath is today, right, for the most part, everybody agree? Sabbath is today? If we celebrate the Sabbath, God gave us a lot of teachings about the Sabbath. And it tells you can't do anything, right? You can't eat. You're not supposed to do errands, right? You're not supposed to do any minimal type of work. It's because you're supposed to be resting and trying to go after God. Does that make sense? God gave very specific instructions. One of those instructions is that you cannot even wash dishes on the Sabbath. What are we doing every Sunday? Washing dishes in God's house. Right? Like, how could we? How could we? Right? That's why I got the sign-up sheet. If we want to follow the letter of the law, right? A lot of times we always think about, like, it's just moral and immoral. As long as I don't do anything immoral, I'm doing what God says. No, his laws were bigger than that. That was a small portion of it. But the rest principle, trusting God, resting, all these type of things, you need recovery, right? Your muscles, everything. If you study it, you need your mind to be taken off of things. There's a lot of benefits to why God said rest. But yet somehow we just write that rule off. And that's what I was saying. We do it in God's house. Isn't that funny? Right? We're completely ignoring what he said. We completely took the freedom to say we can do this. And that's what we said. We love the freedom for ourselves, but we don't want others to have the same freedom when they have a different opinion. And this is where it's important to understand, well, what did God really say about it? What traditions do we do? What must we follow? Right? I'm not trying to knock the people that wash dishes, because there is some teachings that we can get to where God says, hey, is this allowable? So the text in Matthew 12, when they try to correct Jesus for healing on the Sabbath, right? This is chapter 12, verse 3 through 8. They're like, how could you heal on the Sabbath? That's not allowed. The laws don't allow you, right? They're telling the Son of God what he can and cannot do. And that's where he tells them, do you not know that David did this first? When his men were hungry, he took the grains from the temple on the Sabbath to feed his men. God did not punish him for that. God gave him victories afterwards, right? And so this is where you can do good on the Sabbath. That's where it talks about, Jesus uses another example. He's like, if you saw somebody stuck on the road, would you just drive by them? Or would you help them on the Sabbath, right? You can do good. Because they'll do the same thing when he heals on the Sabbath. They try to correct them as well. You can do good on the Sabbath. That's what God said. Because in the end of that section in 12, 3 through 8, he says, and if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. So this is where he was trying to teach them. God wants to be merciful. He wants his people to be merciful. The sacrifice of giving up all this stuff or doing these things is not as important to him as having mercy. Right? So that's what we're trying to keep building on this line of what Paul was saying. You want to force everybody to do these things. You want them to sacrifice everything that you think. You're not having any mercy for them as they're learning and understanding why they should give these things up. You just want sacrifice all the time. Sacrifice, sacrifice, sacrifice. But that's not what God wants. God leads with mercy. He leads, and then that is fueled by patience. And he's the one that keeps growing these people. Right? But we have that freedom to kind of start understanding, hey, what does God say? Because for the most part of the people that wash the dishes, their understanding, their reasoning is, hey, God made us to be good stewards of his creation. We are trying to limit our waste. We are trying to help protect the environment. We are trying to do good for God. So if we're trying to do good for God, nobody can judge us. And that's exactly what the scripture said, right? If they approve of it, they believe that's what they're doing for God, nobody can stop them. Does that make sense? So we should wash with confidence. Because you are trying to do what God wants. The only thing we can do is say, hey, be careful, be wise if you do that. Right? Because you're not getting as much rest on the Sabbath, and that comes a cost with that. Does that make sense? My team, the youth leader team, we do our lesson prep now on Sunday. We shifted to Sunday afternoon. So I'm guilty as well, right? I'm in the same, I wasn't trying to judge dishes. As I said, in some ways, I just want to show you, we all use our freedoms, even if it's directly against what God said. So I have the leadership team prep on Sunday. It was better for them as far as through the week. But now I have to realize, hey, I am taking some of their Sabbath time away. I am taking some of their rest time away. I am taking some of their time away with God. How am I going to assure that God gets that back? How am I going to ensure that they rest with God if we have to do it on this day? Does that make sense? Because I answer to God. He's going to be like, why are you taking my people from me? Right? I can see, we used to do our leadership meeting. Sometimes it lasted like 2.5 hours. Right? I'd go 3 or 4 hours. I had no problem. Like I enjoyed hearing everybody's opinions, what they were thinking about, but they were too tired, right? They needed rest. So we would end at 2 hours. But I can see God saying the same thing to me. Hey, you're wasting a couple hours of their time on Sunday. I don't get to hear Camille. I don't get to hear Bobby. I don't get to hear their thoughts. I don't get to help them rest. I don't get to fill them with more joy. You're taking that from me. Right? And I'm like, no, God. I'm like, right? It's like, I'm not. And that's where, like, I used to have the rotation where they take some time off. It's their option. Now that we're working on the Sabbath, I am more forceful in them taking a week off from the prep and a Friday. Why? Because they need to replace the Sabbath time. Does that make sense? Because I understand God said it is valuable to them. I cannot take that away. So even if I do maneuver around to try to do good, God's way is still the top of my priority. Does that make sense? The freedom cannot go in violation of what He wants, what He desires. Right? Because even for myself, I need Sabbath rest. I take time off. I am one of the guiltiest people of working for God more than spending time with God. Right? All through my seminary, through my, they call it the internships that I did for school that you need to graduate. That's what they identified. Man, you can work for God like no other. You can somehow schedule things and do more things in the day than others did. And they're like, and I was like, it's impressive? They're like, maybe. Depends on how you look at it. Right? They're like, how much time are you spending with God during those times? How much are you reflecting with Him? All these things. And I was like, very minimal. They're like, then it's not good. Right? God don't need you to do all that stuff if you ain't even in a relationship with Him. What are you giving away if you don't even spend time with God? So that's where, like, I'm very protective of the Sabbath for myself. And so then I have to do it for everybody else. Does that make sense? They're obviously adults. They have their own walk with God. They can make their own choices. But at the same time, right, if I choose to put them in their Sabbath, I have to be very careful. And that's what we're saying. The freedom is there for us. And God's the one that's going to keep working on us with that freedom. And that's what it ends up, will end in the very end, right? What he said. For whatever does not proceed from faith is sin. If you know it's wrong and you do it, it is a sin. That's clear as day. If you know it's wrong and you do it, it's a sin. But if you do it from faith and you believe this is what's right, it's not necessarily a sin. That's what that whole section was about. Right? If it's done in faith, it's not a sin. And so for a lot of us, we're kind of like, well, no, I know what sin is. I know these behaviors. I know this. Right? This is what I've been taught. And this is the question I pose to you. How do you know your ideas and traditions are more correct than others? How do you know? Every one of us is stepping out in faith for everything that we believe in. Right? We talk about, like, there's so many different denominations, right? There's people with all kinds of doctorate degrees. They study all the scriptures, and guess what? None of them can agree on anything. Right? They'll be like, no, and that's why and people that have studied more than us have different opinions of us. So if we've never studied or we barely know anything about a topic, do we know more than them? Sometimes we will. We'll be like, nah, I know more than them. I'm not going to follow that tradition. Mine's better. Right? Does that make sense? And that's where it's kind of like, I always laugh where Christians are always like, be humble, be humble. People always love to tell me to be humble. I don't know why. But, right, it's kind of funny when Christians always tell me to be humble, and I'm like, hey, do you think your tradition might be wrong? No, no way. There's no way. I'm like, you are not humble whatsoever. You don't even have a slight possibility that you could be wrong. You're so dug in, you'll never give it up. How's that humble? Does that make sense? And that's what we talk about. Like, if we're really humble, we're humbling ourselves before Christ and God. And yet somehow we're like, I cannot be wrong. Well, that's on you and God. That's between you and Him. All right, that's what we said. I'm not here to correct it. But I would challenge you. If you think every tradition you have is infallible, right? Even when I said it, it's even hard to say that, right? Because it don't make sense. And so this is where it's important for us as to understand. Only when we are in heaven and in God's presence will we really know what was right or not. We are doing our best to figure it out. There's a lot of tools and things that we can do to try to get more answers, try to get more clarity, to be able to have more confidence in what we believe. That's important. But we will not fully know until we're in heaven. Right? Because for the most part, we have so many cultures, so many traditions, so many limitations because of that. Right? If you go to other parts of the world, their Christianity is totally different. They have so many other different ways of doing things. Here, right, we're not very celebratory during the worship time. And I've heard why I've been part of African American church, very different. But one of the other churches that I worked with was somebody from Ukraine. This was back in 2014 when Crimea just got taken over. The worship pastor was a pianist who was from Ukraine. His parents still lived in Ukraine, and they lived on the border of Crimea. And they would witness to a lot of the people that were kind of leaving, right? They were Christian missionaries in a sense. That was their homeland, but they were very dedicated to helping people. And so the mom came for vacation, right? She came to visit her son. And so we were doing a little house worship in his apartment. And so they sang the song, Shout to the Lord. You guys know that song? I won't sing it, but Lindsay's looking at me like, please don't sing. All right. But it's basically like this song about being so excited and encouraged by God, like you just can't help but shout, right? And so when his mom was like, we're just like this very small room, right? All of a sudden she's just going crazy singing this song, just shouting. I'm like, dang, right? I'm like, that's pretty loud. Like this lady is into it. And so then she told us a story after the song. I grew up when Ukraine was still part of the Soviet Union, when that crashed and all these things that happened. They persecuted Christians where I was from. We had to leave our door open when we worshiped so the government could listen in, right? Some people from China have similar background. But basically the government controlled everything that they did, and they could not sing out loud. So when they worshiped in Ukraine, in her house back there, back in the 90s, they had to whisper the words. Whisper, shout to the Lord. I forget the lyrics now. I'm too paranoid about singing. Right? But it's like, shout to the Lord for all the stuff he's done. Right? Like they had to whisper because they could not, otherwise they'd be killed. So when she was now free in our country, she was shouting as loud as she can. Does that make sense? That was what her joy was. And imagine if somebody like that came to our church on Sunday and they were yelling and clapping and all that stuff, and you think a lot of people would come to tell them like, hey, you got to be quiet. We don't do that. Does that make sense? How many of us be like, traditionally, we don't do that. That's our preference. And we would drive that person away just because we think you should not be loud. Does that make sense? That's why I said, like, it can be so minute. It can be so small. But yet somehow we can easily offend somebody just because we think that's the right way. If you know the Bible, David is one of the funniest dudes with worship, right? He's our strongest example in the Old Testament. But after his main victory against the Philistines, when he was walking back into town, he was dancing, he was going all crazy. And his wife got so mad and embarrassed by him, she basically stopped loving him because of the way he was dancing for the Lord. Right? His wife, Mika? Does that make sense? That's why it's funny. Like his own wife got upset how he was dancing because he was celebrating for the Lord. That's why I said some people have preferences, but is it what David? Obviously, God didn't judge him for dancing. That's where we get a lot of our worship from, David. Does that make sense? He helped usher in a lot of the era of what we believe and a lot of the scriptures that we justify behind how we worship. But that's where it's funny. Like you could always see people are always offended by what somebody else did. And most of us love to tell people how they offended us. And Paul's saying, don't do it. And so this is important to understand. We want to tell everybody what to do. Is that what Jesus would do? Is that the example that he set for us? I was thinking about the woman caught in adultery. Right? When they come, they bring her to her, they're going to stone her. Right? Legally, they could stone her. But legally, they had to stone her and the guy. That's the way the law worked. Right? If you're caught in adultery in that culture, both of you get killed. Simple, easy. No need for interpretation. But they tried to trick Jesus, number one, so it was an interesting situation. But even as they brought Jesus, this woman that was caught in adultery, right, they're like, what should we do? You do not see Jesus tell her, I can't believe you committed adultery. You should be stoned. Doesn't say that. He doesn't call out the people that want to stone her. Right? He doesn't say, I can't believe you guys want to stone her. None of you are free of sin. None of you can be able to kill her. Doesn't say that either. Right? He doesn't call them out for trying to test them and make it a no-win situation. He doesn't do that. What does Jesus do? He handles it in the easiest way, like the smoothest way possible. He's like, okay. He draws something in the sand and he says, if you guys don't have any, if someone has no sin, then go ahead and throw a rock. Does that make sense? He knew none of them could live up to that. And so that's why the woman, and that's where, they all walk away all upset. Right? And that's where she goes, what's going to happen to me? He's like, nobody could judge you, so walk away and sin no more. Does that make sense? He does tell her, but after he did that to protect her life. Does that make sense? She just said, like, how did he know what to say to drive away all these people? Right? That's what we say, like, his command of the law, his command of God, the scriptures, this is somebody. And when he tells me to do this, I'm going to now change. Does that make sense? That's what that's what we're seeing. Like, even in Jesus' stories, he's not quick to just jump on people. And so this is where hopefully you guys can understand, right? We must have faith that God will transform people and teach them what is right. We want to say we're going to force them to change. We're going to be the reason. That's not what God has ever said. We do not get to claim that we change anybody. Does that make sense? It's already said we can't do it, and yet somehow we want to do it. Right? We ignore what God said because tradition says we should be calling people out. But God's the one that says, I'm the one that does it. And that's what he says. You must move in, everything's about moving in faith. We must have faith that God will transform people. We must have faith in the Holy Spirit to produce the fruit in people's lives and not our rules. Our rules will not change anybody. The Holy Spirit does. I've never been presented a rule where I'm like, man, this is the reason why I'm changing. Right? Somebody did not make such a good rule that I was like, man, I really need to change. No. It was always the Holy Spirit that changed me. It was always God's leading, teaching, right? His hand always on my life. He's the reason why I've ever done what's right. He's the reason why I continue to pursue holiness, purity, all those type of things. It's on him, not rules. Some of you guys might be like, well, Joaquin's not that much of a person anyway. He's not that special. Like, his way of growing is not that good. I want to be better. I want to be like Paul. How was Paul convicted and changed? At the time, the people that were pushing the rules of now following Christ, he killed them. Right? He was like, these people want to push rules on me? They want to push these new rules, this new teaching? Nuh-uh. Stephen, dead. I got a list, people to kill. Does that make sense? He's like, you want to follow these rules? Go ahead, follow them to the grave. And as he's riding out on that horse, Jesus kind of, bam, knocks him off that horse. Right? Says, surprise! Right? I got you now. I'm going to change you. I'm going to blind you so that you now will see the truth and will seek the truth. Does that make sense? The faith, that's what we said. Why do we trust that God's going to do the process? Because we've seen it over and over. We've seen it in our lives. We've seen it through all the characters in the Bible. None of us can take credit. It all goes to God and the Holy Spirit. So why do we not have the faith to let him change the people in our lives? Does that make sense? That's what we have to start asking ourselves. Why do I feel I need to do it? I need to stop them. God's the one that's going to do it. Because I was thinking, even for parents, right? How many times did you give a rule to your kids and they disobeyed? And did they disobey instantly? Like the first chance they got to disobey it? No. Camille's parents didn't say no, so I guess Camille followed the rules. But right, for the most part, as soon as a parent gives a kid a rule, they go and do the opposite. Right? And that's what's funny. Like, as Christians, we think, like, I'm going to tell this person the rule. That's going to magically make them stop. No. Usually a Christian then wants to do it even more. Right? A non-believer wants to do it even more when you just tell them they can't. And so that's why it's always funny. Why do we somehow think we're the ones controlling it? Right? And that's why Paul was saying, you're causing divisions because of your faith is put in the wrong thing. Your faith is put in the power of man, not in the power of God. And so that's why I said we have to remember that no one was able to convince us to change. Our transformations came only from God. If that's the case, then as we see people, we will be praying for them harder and harder. We will find ways to love them, to be there for them like Christ was. Right? We'll find all the ways to do what we can, our little part, knowing that God's doing the rest. Right? It comes down to faith in him. And so I had the Galatians text on the handout, but you guys won't be able to see it. But my application is to keep reading, read Galatians this week. Right? Have some time to read it, because this is where Paul really goes after. He goes hard after the law. Just a taste, right? He says, for all who rely on works of the law are under a curse, for it is written, cursed by everyone who does not abide by all things written in the book of the law and do them. Right? It is evident that no one is justified before God by the law, for the righteous shall live by faith. Paul was saying, if you want to follow one law, you got to follow all of them. That's what God has said. Right? So a lot of us want to put, you should follow this law and this law. And they were like, but ignore the other 10 that I'm not doing. Does that make sense? That's okay to ignore them. And that's where I was like, no. That's what they said. You either choose in freedom or you choose in law. You choose in faith or law. And that's why I said it's dangerous, it's scary sometimes because we don't know how people are going to handle that. But we know that if they're free in Christ and they are appreciated, they will then look to Christ to use it properly. Because that's where Galatians 5:1, for freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore. Do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. That's where I pulled that text for talking about slavery. The last one that Paul said, right? For you were called to freedom, brothers. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. It is there. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you are not consumed by one another. Right? Even in Paul saying, you can be free. Make sure you use it to love another. And if you start pushing things and devouring somebody, they're going to devour you right back. Does that make sense? That's why I said everything that you do, we can find a scripture to say it's good, and I can find a scripture that says it's bad. Right? And that's what we said. Like, it's so easy to tell somebody why, but in reality, they can flip it right back. And that's what Paul was trying to avoid. All you're going to do is keep tearing each other down. There will be no unity. There will be no body of believers if every single person is correcting. Right? And that's what he says. Do it out of love, right? So this week, thank Jesus for freeing us, right, from slavery to sin, granting us freedom beyond our wildest dreams. Read Galatians. Take some time to write down all the things you think Christians must do to walk like Christ. Look to see if you can find scriptural evidence that states exactly what you believe. Right? Remember what we said. We got to separate from opinions to what God said. So if you think a Christian should do all these things, write it down and then see if it's actually from Scripture. Does that make sense? If it's not from Scripture, quit telling people it's what God said. Do not put a God stamp on it where nobody can argue with you if it ain't from Scripture. Because that's not what God said. Right? And so if your beliefs do not have a clear Scripture for them, ask God to help you not force others to follow them, and trust God will convince them to do what is right. If you believe certain things are good for people to do or to abstain from, that's fine. You can have that belief, you can have that wisdom, but trust God's going to give that to the other person. Because if you're telling somebody that God says it, and then you tell them, hey, read your Bible, read it more. And when they start reading their Bible and they don't find it, they're going to think you're a liar. Or your credibility's gone as a teacher. Does that make sense? Because they're like, you didn't say that. So we can start changing our terminology to, in my opinion, I think this is wise. There's nothing wrong with that. Right? And so the last thing I'll say with you, I'll leave you with, when someone asks you if they should do something, don't just give your opinion right away. Commit to studying that topic with them to see if they should do it or not. Right? Don't just, that's why I said the humble, right? The humble side. Do you know what they should do? Only God knows what they should do. Spend some time studying it. I used the alcohol example earlier. Somebody says, hey, should I drink alcohol? How much should I drink? Let's say, hey, let's study. Let's look at it. Right? You don't even have to go in the Bible to start this. You can say, hey, let's look at all the research, all the statistics behind alcohol. Alcoholism, people that struggle with it. Right? You can say, hey, there's people that, how much money they waste on it. All the struggles. People have lost families because of it, right? Brawls. All kinds of things. You can show them all the ways alcohol can hurt them. And then you can say, hey, if you want to do it, that's your choice. But just know this. Jesus will be there for you if you want freedom. If you become addicted and you need help getting out, Jesus will be there for you. Jesus will help you overcome that. Jesus will help you. Right? I'm here to help you if you need it. No judgment. This is your choice to make. If it, I'm praying that it doesn't hurt. You are able to do it in a wise way, self-control. But if not, I'm still here for you. Same way Jesus is. Does that make sense? If Christians took that approach, we would have a very different image that we're portraying. We would then be known for our love. I love you enough to show you that, hey, this might not be wise. But I love you enough to let you have your freedom to take your chances. But I also love you enough to be there for you without judgment and help you understand who can help you with this. Does that make sense? Because the greatest story that I think of was the prodigal son that puts us out. He asked for his inheritance before the father died. The father did not stop him. right? The father didn't say, I can't believe you asked for this. Most of us kind of put a lot of judgments on the kid. But in reality, the father in that story says, go ahead. Here's the freedom. The kid makes some mistakes. He knows and he comes back, right? I think my father will let me allow me to be a servant. And then what does the father do? Runs out, grabs him. And it's important to understand in that story, what does the father say? My son was dead, but now he's alive. Even if we abuse our freedom, even if we do not, because a lot of us, we want to try something before we ever commit, right? God does not stop us. But he understands because you have that desire, you have not fulfilled that freedom, you're not alive yet because you have not understood that you want to live under God. That there is no better person to live under than Christ. Does that make sense? And God's like, have the freedom, but guess what? I'm coming for you. My love is, you cannot outrun my love. It's going to be there always in your mind, right? That was the story of the prodigal son. When he's looking at the pig's food, right? He remembers his father's love and how he treated everybody. Does that make sense? The image of the love was what brought him back. And that's what we have to understand for every one of us, for every single person that we deal with. God is the one that is bringing everybody back. He is the one that is in control of every single life. And I hope you continue to trust and understand that it's between you and him, and you thank him for that, right? Because if it was up to me, I'd be tossing people out of church every hour, right? If it was up to somebody else, they'd be throwing me out of church every hour. But because it's Christ, all of us are here, and all of us are here to stay. All right, so please join me in prayer.